Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kindy Kruller. I'm with the Illinois Green Alliance, a senior program manager leading the programs and partnerships of the Building Energy Hub. I'm so excited to invite you to join us for this 1-hour presentation this afternoon with two wonderful speakers to talk about funding your green projects, federal and incentive updates. Next slide, please. For those that are just joining us for the first time, Illinois Green Alliance is a member-driven nonprofit that advances sustainability in the built environment to ensure a greener and healthier communities across our state. Through our collaborative initiatives, innovative programming, our advocacy efforts, we've amplified the voice of green building communities to position Illinois as a leader in our sustainable building practices. Our members of Illinois Green Alliance represent every sector in the building industry, from architects and engineers to building owners and construction professionals. You can learn more about our membership and check out our upcoming events and learn how to get involved by visiting our website. Check out the chat for that link. This webinar is approved through AIA for 1 LU credit and can be logged for 1 LEED AP credit or Green Associate CE hour. Certificates of completion for both AIA members and non-AIA members are available upon request. To request AIA CE credit or a personalized certificate of completion for the architecture license CE reporting purposes, please follow the QR code on your screen and complete the linked forms. I'll also be linking the form in the chat now and at the end of the session. For those interested in self-reporting CE for your LEED AP or LEED Green Associate credentials, we will be sharing self-reporting instructions and a fillable certificate of completion in our follow-up email to all attendees next week. And here are today's AIA learning objectives. We're just going to leave these up for a moment so you can review them, and then we're going to start the program. Last but not least, before we get started, we would like to thank our incredible sustaining sponsors for their commitment to our vision. We have so many wonderful companies and associations that support our work. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. If you and your organization want to commit to advancing our vision for a net zero future in Illinois, please visit our sponsorship page to start a conversation today. We're really excited to have this be the first co-branded Illinois Green Alliance and Building Energy Hub, a program empowered by the Illinois Green Alliance Building Energy Hub program. We provide a variety of assistance to existing buildings to understand the opportunities to retrofit, save money, and future-proof your buildings. We provide practical approaches to meeting energy efficiency compliance requirements. We provide a return on investment focused energy improvements that enhance building value, clear pathways for performance and energy efficiency, access funding resources and incentive programs for building energy efficiency. And lastly, we have a variety of real-world examples of successful energy efficiency implementations. Just go check out the Hub website. You can find case studies. We have our podcast, a video library, and a variety of other resources to check out. Next slide. The Hub is supported through a variety of partners. We have been funded through ComEd as well, the U.S. Department of Energy and Builders Initiative. And we work closely with many of the partners that you see on the screen for delivering programming, building resources, and other guidebooks. We also want to share our deep appreciation for our advisors, our partners, and our volunteers. Learn more about the Hub at buildingenergy.hub. Next slide. I'd love to take this moment to introduce today's speakers. Monty Hillman leads the Climate Investment Solutions Department at SIG that specializes in market-based strategies to finance decarbonization. His expertise includes incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act, PACE financing and beyond, renewable energy certificates, carbon offsets, and more. Previously, Monty spent nearly 2 decades at the St. Paul Port Authority.
We're losing you a little bit there, Kendi.
25 million in public investment. Our other speaker is our very own board member, Owen Hall. He's a senior vice president.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Kindy. I'm not sure if Kindy can hear me. I think her Wi-Fi might be struggling just a little bit. If you can hear me, I'm just gonna finish off our bios. So as Kindy was saying, Owen Hull is the Senior Vice President with Weldon Development Group, a multifamily real estate developer based in Chicago, Illinois. And at Weldon, Owen leads capital market strategy, focusing on capital raising, structuring, and assessment management. Outside of work, Owen serves as the board of directors of Illinois Green Alliance and Slipstream. So I want to let you all know that we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this session, so feel free to add your questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat, and we'll get those addressed at the end. You're all muted and can just put all of your thoughts in the chat and all your questions in the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to our speakers to get started.
I did have to just request to share there. There we go. Thank you. All right. Are folks seeing this? Everybody, somebody? Yes. Beautiful.
Yep, looks good. But if you want to throw it into, there you go. Great.
There we go. Thanks, everybody. And big thanks to Illinois Green Alliance and the team there for getting this all set up. I think you heard at least part of my bio before we started losing audio. Monty Hillman with Sustainable Investment Group. I'm going to go through about 20-25 minutes of slides and try and get through them quickly. Don't worry, they will be shared. There's a ton of info in there and it'll be available for you as a resource. But I want to get through the slides so we can begin a conversation with Owen about how this plays out on the ground, and then have time for Q&A at the end. So you heard about me being at the Port Authority in St. Paul for 20 years. We were a quasi-governmental developer, owner, lender, the PACE administrator for all of Minnesota. In my nearly 20 years there, 15 years of PACE, we saw about 350 PACE deals come through our credit committee, which I sat on. About $500 million of investment in renewables and efficiency measures. I'm a broker, was representing the port in joint ventures with private sector developers, so got a pretty good crash course in commercial real estate finance, public finance, incentives. Everything we did had 24 sources of funds in it. But that really set up for leaning in, when I left the Port Authority to come to SIG, leaning into helping folks figure out what do these tools look like, particularly within the IRA, in a cash flow, in a pro forma, what are you showing the investors, the appraiser, et cetera. So we're gonna get through some basics. We're gonna hit on some math. We're gonna talk about some zoo animals. And then we're gonna have a conversation with Owen. So hold on tight. You'll see just a representation of some of our clients, pretty broad swath across the AEC world, developers, REITs, property managers, asset managers, et cetera. We touch a lot of buildings. We've certified over 500 LEED projects. We touch about 500 Energy Star buildings a year, and we serve about $34 billion in assets annually with sustainability services. So when I came over a couple of years ago, I started a new department called Climate Investment Solutions. And it really was all about how do we drive the marketplace that, frankly, a lot of our counterparts, colleagues in private real estate development aren't tracking this stuff at a granular level like some of the folks probably on this call. We work with folks across asset classes. These tools scale from small to large. This is a smattering of different projects we're working on across asset classes. There's nonprofit, tax exempts in here, LIHTC, a $250 million hospital, a retail strip mall, public school, owner-occupied industrial, spec industrial. There's generally some way to improve financial performance by unlocking these incentives. We talk to our clients about green value creation, the idea that there are smart decisions you can make from pre-design through exit that drive valuation. Many years ago, I thought that the elusive green premium, a little more net rent, a little less OpEx, was going to really be the driver. And these days, a lot of smart folks are thinking, yes, a green premium is great, but what we really want to model and avoid are stranded assets and brown discounts. Buildings that are being discounted, energy codes, building performance standards, investor appetite related to carbon emissions, all sorts of reasons that smart owners need to be thinking long-term about stranded assets and brown discounts. This is the slide I used to show about the Inflation Reduction Act. And you can see there's 9, 10 different tools here, and we'd spend 15 minutes going through the slide. As you can imagine, I've had to update this slide since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. You'll hear me refer to it OBBBA, plus or minus the B's. I may get it wrong here. This is what this slide looks like today. So yes, there were definitely some tough hits in OBBBA, but you'll see as we go through this, some of the heavy hitters are still available, particularly the investment tax credit for geothermal, battery storage, thermal energy storage, and solar are still available. We'll get into the details here in a second. The home energy rebate, the Homes and Here programs, those are fairly impactful, very impactful for residential projects. And of course, caught up in a morass of administrivia and legal challenges. EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, where things like Coalition for Green Capital's funding lives, are tied up, as I understand it, in the DC Circuit Court still. May or may not be safe depending on how some of that plays out. This is Section 48E investment tax credit. Again, you don't have to memorize this. You'll get this slide. But basically, this is showing 48E investment tax credit for geothermal, battery storage, thermal energy storage, well protected out through 2033. You do see at the top here for solar, there is a cliff at the end of 2027. It's key to note here, for the 48E solar tax credit, you need to begin construction by next July 4th or be completed by the end of 2027. So there is a cliff at the end of 2027. I guess how I sleep at night and reassure my clients is that, hey, we've still got over 2 years for solar ITCs, and 2 years in this world is a political lifetime from now. So keep the faith and keep your heads up. There are some critical dates specifically for solar and wind coming up at the end of this year. Some new restrictions kick in that may make things difficult, but still doable. So we've got a bunch of clients running around trying to document beginning of construction for solar by the end of this year or by July 4th next year. Again, geothermal, legacy section 48, you can go with geothermal or 48E. There is a difference in how you calculate tax credit basis. Generally, I'm finding across my projects, legacy section 48 is the more advantageous way to go due to the rules and the math involved. And you'll see a little bit of that here. This is a simplified example of legacy section 48, maximizing the dual use equipment provisions. So very typical, over here on the left, the blue bar, a contractor comes back to my client, the owner, and says, hey, this geothermal thing is going to cost us $4 million more out of the gate. Why would we do that? I say, well, wait a second. Let's hold on here. Let's look at everything we can grab for eligible tax credit basis. And what integral property and dual use property allow for is basically grabbing everything connected to the geothermal source under certain rules. But that means we get to add in the distribution system, both the hydronic distribution system and the air handling, DOAS, air handling units, ductwork, diffusers, controls, a percentage of the design time, all of that can go into eligible tax credit basis under Section 48. So oftentimes we see nearly twice as much tax credit basis as the actual incremental first cost, that's the yellow bar. On a really good day, we're getting you a 50% ITC. On a still pretty good day, we're probably getting you a 40% ITC. And so oftentimes we can cost neutralize that move to geothermal. And you see over here on the right, resulting in a $0 net cost with 30 to 50% less energy use. Note, you don't see 30 to 50% less energy cost, because that's another calculation. You have to remember that as we electrify these buildings, in a lot of markets, electricity is 3 to 4 times more expensive than gas. And so you want to offset that electric load as much as possible for these all electric buildings, right? So pairing a geothermal building heating and cooling system with solar PV is really the way to go. I mean, that's the way to really get the most bang for your buck in your projects. We may come back to this. How do you get from, say, 6%, the base tax credit, to 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70%? Really, it's probably effectually 30 to 40, 30 to 50%. And I know a good chunk of Chicago is designated an energy community. Even if you're outside of the energy community map, most of those maps, Department of Energy website, et cetera, should have a little asterisk down there that says does not include energy community, does not include brownfield energy communities, or it might say, now I think they've updated it to list EPA identified brownfields. Those aren't requirements to get the energy community bonus. The requirement is for this 10% tax credit bonus is to be on a site that has the presence or potential presence for hazardous substances. You document that with a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessment, and all you need to do is document the presence of hazardous substances above the detection limits of the laboratory. Doesn't have to be a cleanup action, doesn't have to be in a state or federal cleanup program, voluntary or enforced. You just have to have the lab data. And in most urban and suburban markets, that lab data will come back showing background levels of arsenic, mercury, cadmium, lead, PAHs, whatever, some stuff that's been falling out of the sky for 80, 100 years. And that will trip those triggers at the laboratory. PACE, I mentioned we're the PACE administrator in Minnesota laws at the Port Authority. What is commercial property assessed clean energy financing? It is long-term fixed rate real estate financing for commercial, which results in utility bill savings. And the loan payments, the debt service payments, are made through property tax assessments. And there's a little bit of magic there in the timing of those property tax assessments. It buys you a little time on the front end before those assessments get certified to your property taxes. So you can start saving energy and producing renewable energy, excuse me, before your first debt service payments are due often. How are we using CPACE? Well, it's changed over time, and it changes over time due to what's going on in lending markets. So as originally envisioned and in strong lending markets, PACE can be seen as an equity reducer and an internal rate of return juicer. What do I mean by that? In a strong market, the lender might say, we're going to top out at 60% loan to cost. And if you want to bring in 10% of PACE, that's fine. We're still at 60% loan to cost. We'll basically swap in PACE as an equity replacement. Very beneficial. In tighter markets, when financing is scarce and lending is tougher, you still can bring PACE in. The lender might say, well, we're at 60%, and if you want to use 10% of PACE in the capital stack, we're going to lower our loan to cost to 50%. So not really an equity replacement, but still more beneficial in many cases than preferred equity or mezzanine debt or other more expensive forms of capital. Where it's being used often over the last 2-3 years is for liquidity. So owners are coming back and putting PACE financing, sometimes for projects. In a lot of programs, you can look back 2 or 3 years and capture those costs and basically refi them. So they're using a PACE loan to refi out improvements they've already paid for and basically freeing up that cash for liquidity to pay off some senior debt because you're not meeting your loan covenants with your senior lender. or building up reserves that the lender wants you to have, et cetera. So different uses of PACE. And we certainly can talk about how and why PACE works and where there are some struggles. There's a big laundry list of stuff, and how do you figure it out? How do you figure out what works, what doesn't? When I came over to SIG and started building up this department, I started with, well, first of all, I put my developer hat on. We got to figure out what works. And so the what is the applicability matrix. We look at the laundry list of green financing tools down the left, and then we sort them by asset class, by scope and technology, by developer modality, and we'll come back to that, and then look at which ones impact capital stack, cash flow, and valuation. And we wind up with a list of tools that should work for your project. What do I mean by developer modality? Probably one of the more important concepts for non-real estate professionals. I'm a broker, non-brokers, non-developers, non-real estate finance types. Depending on how you're structured, your ownership profile, your modality, I call it, these things may work or work differently for you. You see my merchant builders are the cheetahs, right? They want to build it and fill it and sell it oftentimes before permanent financing is ever put on the project, or hopefully as soon as possible. And I will tell you, as I tell my merchant builder clients, there are ways to use the investment tax credit in a merchant build model. They will say, well, there's a 5-year recapture, so if we sell it, that tax credit can be recaptured by the IRS. True. But what it requires is we go back to kind of pre-IRA models of monetizing tax credits, meaning tax equity structuring. Folks generally don't want to hear that because tax equity structuring can be expensive. There's a lot of attorneys, there's a lot of CPAs involved, but certainly doable. We did it at my church 15 years ago for a solar project to monetize the tax credit, commonly done in LIHTC projects, new market tax credit projects, et cetera. But you understand they're going to look at this differently than our REITs, who generally don't pay corporate income taxes on real estate projects, or our mush market clients, or owner users. Not pejoratively the sloth here, but owner users generally tend to have longer term thinking, longer term vision, longer term holds. So these tools might work a little better for them in some instances. For some clients that are tax exempt, they can get direct pay. By now, I hope folks on this call have heard of. So this is the $250 million hospital as a tax exempt entity. They'll get a check from the federal government instead of a tax credit because they don't need it. We've got a nonprofit clients that are going down this path, a homeless youth shelter, a BIPOC incubator here in Minneapolis, et cetera. Local governments, big on direct pay. Other clients, like my affordable housing clients that are using LIHTC, are finding interesting synergies. The most important one for LIHTC and the investment tax credit are the ability to double dip on basis. And I'll show you the math on that in a second. But basically, for every dollar you spend, it counts as on energy property. For the investment tax credit, it also counts as basis for the low-income housing tax credit. So there's some really great ways to juice this stuff on LIHTC projects. You couple that with custom utility allowances that allow you to document the energy savings and basically keep that non-billed utility rent as base rent, which increases the project's net operating income, which therefore generates more loan proceeds to fund the project. We believe this makes those LIHTC projects more competitive in these competitive scoring rounds that many states use to allocate bonds and other low-income housing resources, and should decrease the subsidy per unit, which should help make you more competitive. We add here that we believe these are committed sources of funds. I'm talking specifically about the investment tax credit, because it's not an application process. There's no one that's going to tell you you get it or don't get it. You put it in your spec, you put it in your plans, you build it, you place it in service. You do a lot of work. I do a lot of work in the background to document all this appropriately. But then it generally is available. And so in our mind, it's a committed source of funds. Depending on your state or funding program, they may take issue with that, but I would argue it's a solid play. Here's the math on the LIHTC. and ITC synergy. So you see this client had a baseline HVAC system for $3 million, a $7 million geothermal option for a $4 million delta. On the ITC side, you capture all of the 7 million as basis, and at 83 cents on the dollar, it's generating $2.9 million of equity at closing. On the low-income housing tax credit side, you grab the additional $4 million you're actually spending as LIHTC basis. With your qualified census tract boost, you run the math on a 4% tax credit at 83 cents on the dollar. Oftentimes, the tax credit investors are getting pretty savvy about these energy tax credits. So oftentimes, your LIHTC credit investor is the same, and they'll also buy the energy tax credit. In this case, generated another $1.7 million of equity at closing. So my client is looking at this saying, hey, I'm $4.6 million ahead on a $4 million first cost. And then comes the realization, well, we're already carrying an additional $750,000 sustainable HVAC upgrade in our sources and uses in our pro forma. And so that's available to help pay for this energy system. So really, in their mind, they're $5.3 million ahead of a $4 million first cost. So about $1.4 million to the good on taking this LIHTC project geothermal. Looking at some of the analysis we would typically run, we're generally comparing conventional design and financing versus green design and financing. And so this is a project, this is unfortunately a pre-OBBBA model. And you can see how dramatic it is, or could have been, or will be in the future. Let's put it that way. You can see here on the left, about $20 million senior debt, $14.2 million of equity the owner has to show up with. So my client was looking at a $14 million equity raise. They've got a couple $1 million of TIF in it. We come over here to the green side. Senior lender likes the fact there are these other sources involved, de-risking their profile. We bring in 2 PACE loans. The second loan, PACE loan, is really just to advance the tax credit, and then is taken out when that tax credit is monetized, reducing debt service in year 2, let's call it, and improving financial performance. This also is loaded up with another $1.9 million of the HERE rebates, the home energy rebates I mentioned briefly earlier. In most states, many states, I believe Illinois and Minnesota, the dollars are kind of in limbo until someone can sort out, is a conditional approval contractually obligated? Can it be rescinded? Can it not? I think a lot of folks are scratching their head around the country. And I'm on the advisory committee here in Minnesota for the home energy rebates, and we're not getting a lot of really positive answers. I've got another client right now where we're probably having to take out about $1.2 million of home energy rebate money from their pro forma. In terms of a feasibility analysis of how this would work on this project, we do a quick green sources and uses. What's the green stuff going to cost? To get the green money, you got to do the green stuff. And yes, it's going to cost more, about $5.8 million of costs. But you can see on the sources side, we're showing up with about $8 million of sources to serve that $5.8 million in costs. And I think this is probably illustrative. Here's the ITC for the ground source heat pump geothermal. Here's the home energy rebate. You can see why I call these heavy hitters. Energy property depreciation. Unfortunately, there is also some mucking around with how energy property is depreciated. And even though we got 100% bonus depreciation back out of OBBBA, there are going to be some limitations on it. So instead of taking all that depreciation in year 1, if things hold the way they're looking, you might have to consider that 20-year depreciable property, which is a big delta from being able to expense it all in the first year. But you also see here some of the things that did go away. The 179D, not technically gone yet. You'll see in the notes from that slide with all the arrows and bullseyes on it. Not technically gone yet, but pretty quick here next summer. The 45L, your units need to be placed in service and rented by next July 4th in order to grab the 45L. So it's, unless you're in leasing now, For a lot of folks, it's going to be a tough bar to hit. But as you can see here, they're good, they're nice, they're helping, but they're not driving decision making, I would say. In order to fully evaluate the feasibility of using these approaches, we look at the cost of capital. So up top here in gray is conventional cost of capital. Down here below is green cost of capital. And so we look at how much is your money costing you on the debt and equity side. In this case, it's fairly nominal to go to the green route. On a $36 million project, $41 million project, if green, it's fairly nominal delta on the cost of capital. We look at cash flow and cash flow impacts to valuation. And so what this is saying is there is $24,000 annually of solar revenue generation. There's another $170,000 of energy efficiency savings. And if landlords can capture those two numbers as landlord income, impacting and increasing net operating income, that drives building valuation under the income approach to valuation, which is how most commercial real estate is valued in the world today. So if you go all the way over here to the right, you see the column that's labeled green financing with the efficiency measures and the solar with a green lease. And that green lease, basically a modified gross lease where the landlord is now in the utility game. They've carved out energy and utilities, and they are providing them and billing for them and allowing the savings to accrete to net operating income. In this case, if done the most impactful way through a green lease, that bump in net operating income by capturing those cash flow savings generates about $3.5 million in additional building valuation. Similarly, over here, we run a cap rate analysis, a capitalization rate analysis on the asset. We generally model between 10 basis points and 100 basis points. 100 basis points is 1%, 10 basis points is 1/10 of 1%. And you can see with just a 25 to 50 basis point modulation, we're dramatically improving asset valuation. So cap rate and the valuation aspect of these sustainability strategies is really key. We throw it in a little snapshot and talk to the owner about what kind of zoo animal they are and how these tools work or don't work for them. This is an investor several months ago said, this is great, we like what you're doing with returns, but is it real and when does it show up? So kind of brass tacks, follow the cash. So we show here what shows up at closing to serve the debt load, what shows up during construction. The home energy rebates were structured as point of sale contractor rebates. We want them to ultimately be realized as equity by the bank. May or may not happen depending on the bank and how they view these tools. And then over here, is the ability to monetize the tax credit or use it on an ongoing basis against tax liability. But you can see for this project, there was about nearly $13 million of sort of aggregate gross green financing benefit on a $42 million project. Not insignificant. By the way, this is a market rate multifamily 125 unit building. You can see here on the left, the outcome, the output from our net zero pro forma, showing the conventional approach on the left, the green approach on the right. When we're showing up and showing a nearly doubling of cash on cash returns, returns on equity, equity multiples, those are the numbers that the folks in the finance world and the real estate world are using to determine what gets built and what doesn't, frankly. Are we today, with losing a bunch of these tools, able to double these numbers? No. But are we still making improvements? Yes. And are the green versions outperforming their conventional counterparts? Yes. This one I do want to dive into a little bit. Another investor asked, well, where are these delta factors in this net zero pro forma? And so I literally went through and spotlighted and then put into this graphic here where the changes are. At the effective gross income level, green leasing, we talked about operating expense and utility bill savings, how those can be beneficial to landlords. Green design should result in lower vacancy rates. green design should increase lease renewal probability. So every time you renew a lease, you're paying a broker or two brokers, one tenant, one landlord, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on these big leases. So if you're renewing the lease, you pay less to renew a lease than a new lease. If that tenant is sticky and staying 90% of the time instead of 80% of the time, that's going to impact your financial modeling. NOI, net operating income, improved with energy savings, the generation of renewables. Maybe you've got solar on the roof. You're just leasing your roof outright to a solar developer. You're using a PPA, a VPPA. Debt service impact. Again, that's the cost of your debt and those debt service payments. By blending down the rates of those debts with CPACE or Green Bank. Our Green Bank here in Minnesota is offering financing basically at treasury rates. I didn't look today, but 3, 7, upwards of 4%. And the ability to retire some of that debt with the investment tax credits and take that debt service number down. Your equity requirement, again, we talked about PACE or Green Bank being seen as an equity replacement by the senior lender, if we're able to do that. But certainly with a bridge loan, we can refi those ITCs when they're monetizable, and take down, basically convert the ITC into equity. Operating cash flow, PACE debt service payments can be passed through as property tax assessments in most net leases. Smart brokers, smart landlord and tenant attorneys will go back and forth and probably try to limit the ability to pass PACE through as an assessment in a net lease. And we look at an after-tax discounted cash flow valuation model, which really rolls all of these tax treatments. Most of our real estate financing analysis underwriting isn't done on an after-tax basis. But because so many of these tools are tax related, in order to gauge and have in front of you for decision making the impacts of them, you really need to look at an after-tax basis and roll these things up. I think this is the last slide. This is just my attempt to explain to myself and others green leasing and how it helps everybody and how it really helps landlords and tenants align on decarbonization. I actually just submitted an abstract, hopefully be selected for ACEE's summer study, working with Institute for Market Transformation, and I hope folks from NREL, I'm just hearing, on a green leasing white paper for ACEE. But you can see here a triple net lease on the left, 15 units of total cost of occupancy. On the right, 14 units of total cost of occupancy. We're cutting the utilities, in this case, I believe by about half, because the landlord is investing in them with these tax treatments, beneficial to them. They're taking on that utility burden, but they're getting really smart about it, allowing them to potentially increase their net rent, their base rent, and still decrease total cost of occupancy for tenants. And there's some math here on the right, kind of proving out on a square foot basis, on an NOI basis, how we're impacting valuation through a green lease. So I'm going to stop there. I know there was a lot, but again, you're going to get the slides, and feel free, obviously, to follow up. My contact info is here on the screen. All right, Owen. Well, welcome. It's been great to get to know you here these last couple of months, Owen. Really interested in what you're seeing and, generally what's the overall state of commercial real estate capital markets?
Yeah, Monty, thank you so much for the question, and thanks to yourself and the Illinois Green Alliance team here for hosting me today. Again, for folks on the line, my name is Owen Hall. I'm a Senior Vice President with Weldon Development Group. I am working on 2 multifamily residential projects located here in downtown Chicago. And where we're at in those project stages, we are really interacting, on a daily, hourly basis with the capital markets. So I'm happy to provide my perspective, which is a relatively narrow one. I'll speak a lot about multifamily projects. I'll speak a lot about, what it's like on the ground here in Chicago, though I would say that it's pretty similar across most of the country. But the short answer to your question is, it's a very, very, very challenging time in the capital markets. And the reason for that, though it's very complex, is mostly it's driven by elevated interest rates. Sort of a fancier, financy way of saying that would be, elevated cost of capital. So for those on the line, I'm sure everyone's familiar at a high level, right? But approximately, let's call it, 36 months ago, we had, these sort of underlying index rates, which, it used to be LIBOR, now it's SOFR. There are other index rates like the Treasury, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year Treasuries. And those rates were very, very low for a very long time. So that cost of capital, the cost of borrowing money, was inexpensive. Rates have increased sort of precipitously, almost on, like a parabolic-like curve over, the past 3 years, and they've remained elevated. So what has that done? It has put a lot of pressure on, sort of commercial and institutional real estate owners and developers. And how does that pressure get applied? The short answer, from my point of view, is that most of commercial real estate financing is structured with debt, right? There are, in general, most of it has some sort of debt or a mortgage on it. And that debt is comprised of two pieces, right? There is the index rate, and then there's a spread. That index rate floats based on prevailing interest rates, both nationally and globally. What has happened, during this time is that spread, that floating rate has increased threefold, fourfold. And so what's happened here is you have folks with floating rate debt on their properties, where their debt service, essentially their mortgage payment, unlike your typical 30-year fixed rate mortgage payment where you're paying a constant amount every month, it doesn't quite work that way in commercial real estate for most transactions. That debt service payment has gone through the roof, right? And so what has happened is you've had, sort of healthy, high-performing assets that now their debt service has, doubled, tripled, or even quadrupled. And where they were generating cash flow previously, now they're not, just because that cost of capital and the cost of debt is so much higher. Add that into, what I kind of call like a double whammy, right, is a little something called the COVID-19 pandemic that happened a couple of years ago, which has really reshaped how folks interact with the built environment, particularly in the commercial office space. So you have this 1-2 punch of, floating rate debt that has skyrocketed and applying a lot of pressure. And then vacancy rates, predominantly in the commercial office space, that has, taken, again, what are healthy assets, 4 years ago, and have, created capital calls, more or less, owners, sponsors having to inject cash into those properties just so that they don't go back to those project lenders, which many times they do. So what does this mean, right? In the institutional investment landscape, right? Those institutional investors, which I'll talk about, the classics are kind of like pension funds, life insurance companies, right? Investors that have lots of cash that they like to deploy and traditionally have deployed that into commercial real estate. Now, those folks have a lot of distress amongst their portfolio, right? And so they are not transacting. They are not buying things. In fact, they are typically trying to sell things. And what happens then is when everyone's trying to sell something, this is just kind of, economics 101, it drives down prices. So what we've seen here is you have a lot of distressed assets for sale that is impacting pricing. You have a high cost of capital. And as a result of it, it's very, very difficult to raise equity for any new construction projects. So what the knockdown effect of that is, right, is, you had mentioned this, in your slides in a really succinct way, is that in the past, right, developers have to bring a sizable equity check to the table, about $15 million, I think, in that example. That equity just isn't there anymore. There are no investors that are willing to put that in. I shouldn't say no, but there are far a far more limited field of investors that are willing to put that into deals today. So what's happened, right, is developers, sponsors for new construction projects have sort of pivoted into what I'll call the subordinate lending space. So you have your senior construction loans, right? There's still some pretty good liquidity in that space. You can still get debt to build projects, anywhere between, 50 to 60% loan to cost, though it is more expensive than it has been historically. But what we're getting now is a lot of how you bridge that gap from, let's call it 60% loan to cost up to, what that sponsor equity is. Where traditionally that would just be, common LP equity. That's being replaced by sort of subordinate or structured financing instruments like preferred equity and mezzanine debt. And those come with really, really high cost of capital. We're talking, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16% is the cost of capital on those type of instruments. So, all of these factors kind of in one have made a really challenging environment. And I think that's sort of part of the picture of why we're here today, right? So how do you bridge that gap? How do you leverage sort of some of these green building strategies to help mitigate, number one, the cost of capital that you're trying to raise amongst the debt, let's call it, but also bring more equity to the table or reduce the equity check that you need to bring. So that's a lot of what I've been working on lately. I'm working on a project here in Chicago too, actually, where we are trying to leverage those investment tax credits, as you highlighted, for ground source heat pumps or geothermal using that legacy Section 48A kind of strategy there. And the trick for me, right, my zoo animal, I'm a cheetah. My physical stature is probably somewhere between an elephant and the bull on there, right? But professionally, I'm a cheetah. It's a real challenge trying to pull that equity forward into the deal for what you had mentioned earlier, which is that 5-year recapture on those ITCs. But you're 100% right. With a small army of CPAs and lawyers, it is possible. That is something that we're working on right now to try to, again, and you're spot on, really. The way you can structure this with that legacy 48A ITC structure is you get more than 2x that first cost investment as it relates to the ITC basis by incorporating that distribution system into there. So it's a meaningful equity check or tax credit equity check for us. But there are lots of other great strategies out there as well. And I think one that you highlighted, which is something that we've looked at very, very closely, is CPACE financing, which is a way of kind of replacing that higher octane, really, really expensive mezzanine debt or preferred equity with something that is at a cost of capital that's probably pretty close to your construction loan. Most of the pricing I've seen on PACE is about the 10-year treasury plus somewhere between 250 to 350 basis points of spread. So I think all the strategies you outlined are 100% spot on. There's real opportunity out here to bring more equity to the table, lower your cost of capital, but it requires a good amount of heavy lifting as it relates to this structuring. So I'll stop there. That was a very long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully there was some interesting context for the folks on the line.
Thank you, Owen. I'll share with the group a conversation I had this morning over coffee with one of our REIT clients, primarily in the office space. They took, which is, given problematic at best. But just to show you, why things are the way they are and why it's so difficult to move the needle. They took a product to market, an asset to market here recently, 500,000 square foot suburban office, Class A, fully leased, LEED Gold, long terms left on these leases, should be a no-brainer. Took it out to market, and the pricing they were getting back reflected what we would call a 12% cap rate, capitalization rate. that same asset in, say, 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, would have been a 6.5 or a 6% cap rate. That difference, you saw the modeling on a half a percentage point of cap rate delta. 6%, I mean, that's tens and tens of millions of dollars of just valuation that has vaporized, given what's going on in the office markets. So, that's not to say that's what's happening in every market in every city. It really is dependent on asset class, on ownership profile, on the market you're in. Some are doing better than others in different cases, but really can be a healthy delta. And that's why we see things so frozen. In addition to the interest rate challenges and the equity challenges, we've also got these valuation challenges. And that's frankly causing a lot of folks to sit on their hands. We talked early on our prep call about, the mantra used to be, well, I heard in 2024, thrive in 25 was what people were hoping at the end of 24. Owen was hearing for several years, survive until 25. But it really is frankly pretty dicey out there. That same client then went on to explain, they're a REIT, they report to GRESB, to CDP, to GRI. They need their 5-star GRESB score. International capital markets, REITs, international players still care about this stuff, regardless of what's going on in the United States. But it does mean when he goes to the C-suite to get capital for a retrofit, an improvement project, MEP upgrades, or a new build, they're looking at him like, well, if we can eke this out, why would we spend any more than we absolutely have to? So the nice to haves around LEED or BREEAM or whatever it may be, they're just hoping to hold on to Energy Star. So it's tough out there, but the only way we can get stuff done is by getting creative, by leveraging these resources, understanding them. States and municipalities are stepping up. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of good work at the state level and the municipal level to sort of backfill what we've lost at the federal level. I see Kindy.
Hi.
Hi
This
there.
is such a good conversation. I hate interrupting it, but we just have a handful of minutes left. And I wanted to get some of the questions out from our audience, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Great. So one of the first questions is for residential projects, can you still get ITC even if the final inspection from your city and village and the permission to operate from ComEd are not done?
For the ITC, I'm assuming this is probably a solar project. It is that permission to operate from the utility that is one of the markers of what's called placed in service. The tax credit isn't real until the energy property is placed in service. That means it's energized, it's functional. That means you've got BMS data logs showing it's working. You've got commissioning reports. You've got letters to operate from utilities. All of those things are required to place the system in service, document the you-know-what out of it to qualify under your IRS regs.
Great, thank you. Are the tax credits that Monty is discussing only available for commercial real estate? Are residential credits end at the end of this year?
Well, when I think of multifamily residential, we would consider that commercial. Everything except, single family, townhome owner owned stuff. But no, there is no differentiating in the tax credits between asset class, between residential and commercial. Even if it's a residential multifamily, the same tax credit rules apply.
Great, thank you. I have a couple questions about PACE. I heard PACE, this is the first one, PACE have a very high interest rate, is that correct? And the second question is specific to Illinois. I thought PACE could not be used in Illinois. Has that changed, or is it a restriction on residential versus commercial? Maybe you can both answer that one or chime in.
I know Owen offered his thoughts on PACE pricing, not too dissimilar than what we're hearing. I would note sometimes it depends on who's funding your PACE loan. So in Minnesota, the Port Authority is the PACE administrator. Initially, we were internally funding all of those PACE loans and held like a 5% interest rate for years and years and years, even when the market started going up, even when interest rates started climbing. The national PACE lenders, who generally serve larger projects like $1 million and above, 2 million and above, 5 million and above is what they're really chasing. Those folks generally do tend to be at SOFR plus 3.75%, 3.85%. Everyone's really nickel and diming the tenths and thousandths of a percent here because it matters when you start doing the math. But I think Owen's right. It's, on par with senior construction loan.
And it's relative, right? What a high interest rate is, again, historically, right? I don't even want to talk about, what a high interest rate is historically, but in a relative fashion, using PACE as a substitute for some of that higher octane financing, like preferred equity or pref equity or mezzanine debt, you're going to see a lower cost of capital, a lower all-in interest rate there than you would with some of those subordinate financing tools that are out there.
Great, thank you both so much. What about green project dollars for school districts or any other municipal related infrastructure and construction?
I'm working on a couple of high schools that are converting to geothermal and utilizing ITC. Solar for All and some of the other IRA related dollars have either vanished or attempting to be vanished. I did note as I was looking at what's going on in Illinois at the state and local level in Chicago for incentives, there are a bunch of programs out there.
Okay.
You guys are doing a great job. And I would imagine there is something that would fit for school districts. It's been a big focus because it's such a big use type across our states and such a great opportunity for efficiency and renewables.
Great, thank you. Can you identify the investor profile pool, terms, change in requirements due to recent federal changes for debt and equity investments for commercial industrial projects that are now focused on green redevelopment, not new construction?
I will probably punt that one to Monty. My experience is really more in the new construction space here.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I exactly understand the question. Retrofits, ITC is available for retrofits. You can reuse up to 20% of the infrastructure in the building and still claim the tax credit on the additional investment beyond that.
Great. Thank you. And we're also putting a variety of resources into the chat for everyone who's following along. We also have some other Illinois Green Board members and folks with expertise that are listening in and providing their information along the way. It's neat to hear about this team connecting green buildings, LEED, et cetera, to ESG. Folks that aren't always connecting these dots. Is there a role or presence of building in ESG reporting also changing as this funding spotlight shifts?
We're not seeing it at the macro scale. A lot of our client contacts might have been directors of ESG 2 years ago. And with all the flap in the US about the term ESG, some of them now are directors of sustainability again, or directors of high performance buildings.
Sure.
But the broader marketplace still cares about what we have conventionally considered ESG impacts and criteria. And it's still a competition. Don't let anybody fool you. This still matters across the world, and folks are putting good money after good projects.
Great.
100%.
I'd love to hear you both talk a little bit, maybe more about like a bright light in some of this, because you've shared both a lot of like updates to the marketplace, new tools and resources that have gone away. So for those folks that are listening and kind of want to walk away with maybe a bright light, what would that be, both Monty and Owen?
I saw a question in the chat about industrial and manufacturing buildings.
Oh,
great opportunities. You got big flat roofs for solar.
Yes.
You oftentimes have manufacturing process loads. A few years ago, one of my customers, business owner, put the largest 1.4 megawatt array on their 275,000 square foot industrial building because it directly offset a process load from their manufacturing process, an electrical load. I ran into him at lunch the other day after 4 or 5 years. Said, yeah, you know, we're spending 150 grand a year off that system, and it's directly making us more competitive. So industrial and logistics folks, look at what Prologis is doing with their platform around the country, and green
Yes.
leasing, frankly. They've really dialed it in. At that scale, it makes a lot of sense. But I would say even at the owner user level on industrial and logistics buildings, there's a lot of opportunity. And I'm
Thank you.
going to say geothermal, geothermal, geothermal.
I'll second that. You know, I think my bright light here is going to talk a little bit locally. You know, I'm a huge believer in Chicago, you know, as a market for commercial real estate. I think, you know, my hometown here and home market has some of the best value fundamentals in the country right now. We have an extremely diversified economy here. We have a growing population in the city of Chicago. Don't believe the headlines. Chicago is growing,
True.
not shrinking. And we have, you know, what I would say is you know, a progressive both state and city government that is enabling things like geothermal in the context of, you know, urban infill high rise to go forward here. So I see tremendous value. I still think Chicago is undervalued as it compares to some of the gateway markets. But I think what we are seeing is capital waking up a little bit, right? Where Chicago had previously been maybe redlined on their list of markets that they're interested in deploying, you know, either equity or debt into. We are seeing a loosening of that here. And I think Chicago is poised to, you know, sort of emerge from this liquidity crisis as a real bright spot in commercial real estate investment nationally. Not to mention Chicago's, you know, positioning as a climate haven. I think the future is very bright here for a bunch of reasons, and that is my take.
Great. Well, thank you both, Monty and Owen. As we've mentioned at the beginning, and please pardon my technical difficulties, so I've relocated and have an excellent internet capacity, but I just wanted to thank you again for presenting on this really important topic. I appreciate the audience questions. I also just wanted to highlight the Illinois Green Alliance's Building Energy Hub. We are standing by to help you access all of these different resources. We have a funding and financing page. We have a podcast. Sign up for our newsletter. And we also have a, if you want additional information on any of these questions, where there'll be an an email address into the chat as well. And we just appreciate all of the interest. There's more programming around this topic coming in 2026, both by the Building Energy Hub, the Illinois Green Alliance, and lastly, please fill out the survey about this webinar today. It's helpful for us to know how we did, but also other topics or areas that you'd like us to dive into. Lastly, thanks again, Monty and Owen. We really appreciate all the time you put into this webinar today and look forward to doing it again. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.